Capitol Hill, Republican representative from Oklahoma and Deputy Majority
This is exciting.
Congressman Tom Cole.
Congressman Tom
Thank
Cole.
God.
He is not Lindsey Graham.
A sane Republican.
Anyway, Tom, let's talk about a couple things. First of all, sequestration. It's here. This thing looks like it's not going to be avoided. I mean, the president's talking about more tax increases. You get a feeling. I mean, he hasn't talked about any specific cuts. It's a very blunt, crude instrument, but it's all we have right now, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it is going to happen. We're more than happy to negotiate with the president about how you redistribute the cuts. You know, a lot less discretionary, more non-discretionary, different categories. That makes sense, and we'll probably do that within the month in the continuing resolution ourselves if the president doesn't come to the table. But the idea there's going to be any more revenue here, that's just not going to occur. These cuts are in law. They're going to happen. We'd like to work and redistribute them, but again, they're going to take place, and they need to take place. We're running trillion-dollar deficits. My goodness.
I'm glad to hear you say that you're open to cuts, that more non-discretionary cuts, because, of course, both sides always go to the discretionary domestic spending because those are the, quote, easy cuts without taking the tougher choices in defense or Medicare. Is that your position?
Very much so. Look, we've got an entitlement crisis, and that's where the real money is. We're going to have to reform those programs, or we're going to lose them. And I don't want to lose Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, but they've got to change dramatically. We tried to do that in the Ryan budget last year. I think you'll see us even more aggressive this year. So that's where we ought to go. But again, we're not going to lose these cuts. They're in law, and the same way the president enjoyed the advantage in the fiscal cliff negotiations, the tax increases were in law, and the best we could do was negotiate and save as many of the Bush taxes cuts as we could. Now, right. These cuts are in law, so they're going to occur, and he should sit down with us and talk about how to make them a little more rational than they currently are.
Tom Cole, gentleman from Oklahoma, a.k.a. Mr. Specificity.
No.
He is, that's what
That's
all the kids
a great name.
All the kids are calling him that on the street of Oklahoma City. Mr. Specificity.
Be king for a day.
I'd be happy to be called Mr. Specificity.
Rejigger the deficit reduction and the sequester more to your liking. What additional areas would you cut in order to scale back some of the cuts you want?
Oh my goodness, let's go first to Medicare and Social Security. I think we ought to link the ages, and I think we ought to gradually move them up. I think we ought to go to change CPI right away. I hate to use the jargon like that.
None of that saves you money this year.
Well, actually, it saves you money within the budget window. We can still, by the way, do some of the sequester. They're still, fat in the discretionary budget. But the real drivers, again, are long-term. And you begin to gradually change that. You change the fiscal outlook of the country a lot quicker than you do with sequester.
John Heilman is here in his Tom Ford jacket, and he has a question for you.
For Mr. Specificity.
For Mr. Specificity. Congressman, I'm a little bit confused about the way Republicans have been talking about the sequester, especially with respect to defense. When the deal first got done, Republicans and conservatives broadly said this would be a disaster for defense, and there's no way we could possibly let the sequester happen because of the impact that it would have on national security and our readiness and all of that stuff. Now the posture seems to have shifted among a lot of your I'm not sure about for yourself, but people now go, well, the sequester would be just fine. If this becomes the way in which we get these spending cuts done, that would be okay. And seems to be a general attitude of backing away from the notion about how severe and how problematic these cuts would be. So explain that shift to me over the course of the last year or so.
Look, I actually think Admiral Mullen had it about right when he said the biggest national security threat to the country in the long term is the deficit. You got to deal with it. That's going to affect the military not just today or tomorrow, but indefinitely. Having said that, again, I would much prefer not to do this. We have taken $500 billion out of defense already. The Commander-in-Chief ought to be at the table with us negotiating about how to redo these cuts. We can do that. He's not been there. He's not laid out a proposal, which is amazing to me. I mean, last year in May and again in December, we passed ways to deal with this without cutting defense. Senate never took them up. The president never responded to our request to negotiate. So here we are. But at the end of the day, you have to start getting this budget into balance. And I think Republicans, it's a blunt instrument, but it's the only one in hand. And if this is what we have to do, we'll do it. And then we'll try and rejigger the cuts, if you will, without lowering the amount being cut in the continuing resolution toward the end of March.
Okay. Proving that I cannot walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
It just hit me.
What?
Chuck Todd's here.
Yes, I've been trying to tell you.
God, I'm sorry, Chuck. I was so swept up by Mr.
I'm a Tom Cole fan.
I am too.
Long time, yeah.
Long
He makes
time
sense.
listener,
He's a big
first
Daily
time
Rundown
caller. Chuck, why
We
don't
had him on before it was cool. Now, now you're putting him on. That's all right. Tom knows where his bread is buttered, though. Right, Cole?
you were Cole before Cole was cool.
Okay, something like that.
All right.
Chuck Todd, first of all, I'm interested in terms of the State of the Union and what we're expecting to hear from the President tomorrow. We'll get to that in a second. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on Lindsey Graham's performance on Meet the Press yesterday. And then
Or Face the Nation. They all blur
Or
together.
Face the Nation. And then I'd like to ask the Congressman the same question about his fellow Republican.
Well, look, I don't think I wasn't surprised. I mean, Lindsey Graham has been saying this about Hagel and Brennan for some time, and this is where he has been on this. And one thing about Lindsey Graham, he's sort of like a bulldog with lockjaw. When he gets sort of grabs onto something, grabs onto an issue, he has a hard time letting go.
A bulldog with lockjaw
That's
who
pretty
follows
good.
cameras around. Go ahead.
But I want to go back to sequester. One thing I think that's been fascinating to watch is the White House, I think, had the same attitude as House Republicans, I'd say about a month ago, which was they publicly would say, they're really not crazy about sequester, but at the end of the day, they're like, there's not much we can do about it. Let it go. It won't be the end of the world. And then that GDP report came out, and they saw what an impact the defense cuts had, the $500 billion that already went in, the impact that it had. And I've noticed just in the last 2 weeks a renewed effort. So I think that the White House is more serious about trying to stop sequester now than I think they were a month ago.
That'll be very interesting. I wonder, Tom Cole, first, I want to ask you about Nancy Pelosi's performance yesterday, and then ask Chuck whether this is truly the view of the president and Democrats. But Nancy yesterday, Tom, said a couple things. I know her, like her, I've known her for a long time, but continue to be stunned that she is a debt denier. She said, we don't have a spending problem, first of all. And secondly, she says the problem with Medicare is not Medicare. Tom Cole, respond.
Look, I have a lot of respect for Leader Pelosi as well, but that's just not the case. And you're living in a fantasy, and she's been there for a long time. I mean, it's somebody that when President Bush talked about reforming Social Security, something we need to do, staged the Democratic comeback in 05 and 06 over fighting any changes whatsoever in Social Security. And that's been pretty constant with my Democratic friends all the way through. But at the end of the day, you just have to look at a budget pie chart. The money is on the entitlement side, that we've got an aging society, we've got a lot of problems in terms of health care costs. If you don't deal with those things, there's not enough discretionary spending to ever balance the budget. So you have to recognize the problem before you can solve it. And in this case, I think she's just not seeing it.
Hey, Chuck, is Nancy Pelosi's position on entitlements is the position of the Democratic Party in the House, certainly. Is that the position of the Senate and the President as well? We don't have a Medicare problem, and we don't have a spending problem?
Well, if you hear the President's words, he himself has said Medicare. He calls it health. He never says Medicare. He always says health care spending is the problem. He's always careful not to use the word Medicare. That's sort of as a hat tip, if you will, to House Democrats. But you're right. There is a little bit of a divide here. The White House likes that Nancy Pelosi's out there sort of drawing I'm not going to, don't touch this at all line in the sand. Then he can be the compromiser from there, if you will, go to the right of Nancy Pelosi on some of these issues. So, no, I mean, there is a split there. And I think that there's a reality that the politics of this is dangerous for Democrats if they mess around too much. It's sort of the interest groups that care about Medicare and Social Security the most, that would spend the most money, super PACs, all of that business. They've kept quiet. They've given the president running room on this stuff. If he moves too much, then you could see all of the angst that you see on the Republican side where they're fighting amongst themselves all the time. You would see that among the Democrats.
All right.
I'll tell you though, Mika, if the Democrats' position is we need another tax increase, and there's not a problem with Medicare, then they give the advantage to the Republicans and allow them back in the game.
Well, they put themselves in a similar category, just the opposite side. Congressman Tom Cole, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Todd, thank you as well. We'll see you on the Daily Rundown.